Of the John Locke Foundation. Thanks for joining me for an abbreviated poll presentation. Here is our October Civitas poll. This is the final poll, or final statewide poll that we'll be doing before the November election day, and so we're always excited to present this one. This is the one that usually gets lots and lots of attention, so we're happy to bring it to you. Again, I say this will be an abbreviated conversation. Usually we do this, we're in person here at the John Locke Foundation. I have a guest commentator. I don't have that today, being that we're going to do a more in-depth conversation tonight down in Wingate, North Carolina at the Jesse Helm Center. Brian Rogers, who is president of the Jesse Helm Center, will be the commentator for the October Civitas poll. So if you're in the Charlotte area, Union County area, and would like to join us tonight, please go to johnlocke.org, click on events. And you can get more information about joining us at that event tonight at 5:45 p.m. But for those of us in other parts of the state that can't do that, I thought that I would do two presentations, but this one is the abbreviated one, just me by myself giving you an overview of the final Civitas poll before Election Day. If you want continued election coverage, you can always continue to follow us at johnlocke.org or at Carolina Journal. And don't forget that on election night on Facebook, there will be a constant live stream for several hours from Carolina Journal giving election coverage of North Carolina. But you want to hear about the poll, which is totally fine. And so we'll get into the October 2022 Civitas poll brought to you by the John Locke Foundation. This poll was conducted by Signal, good friends and partners who've been doing our polling for about 5 years now. They conducted this poll October 20th through the 22nd, so it's a very fresh poll. With 600 likely general election voters, these people self-identified as likely to vote. That gives us a margin of error of 3.99% with a confidence interval of 95%. In other words, if we perform this poll 20 times, 19 times out of those 20 times, the results would come within that 3.99% plus or minus margin of error. People always want to know about our methodology, so you know how many voters or what our sample size was and who our sample size was. We also did a mixed method mode of live phone calls, text messaging, and emails to get a wider swath of people to partake in the poll. That's the model that we've started since last year, and so that's what we did this year, and so that was how we polled people. Let's talk about the electoral environment. Where are we? What are people feeling right now? This is no real surprise, but how are people going to vote? We wanted to see that. We saw an insurmountable, historic level of people voting by mail in 2020 for obvious reasons and understandable reasons. And so this is a bit more back to normal, although I'll say that the 53.9% voting early in person might be a slight uptick from what we've seen in the past. Voting absentee by mail at 8.9%, that's within a point or two of what we've been seeing. We've been polling this for 3 months now. And so generally speaking, you're going to see 80 plus, nearly 90%, actually more than 90% of people voting in person some way or another. If you look down at the crosstabs, which by the way, you can go to johnlocke.org, and I'll remind you again here in a little bit, but you can go to johnlocke.org, click on the polls tab, and you can follow along if you want with all of the top lines and crosstabs on all of these questions. But you can see that Republicans, a plurality of Republicans are going to vote in person on Election Day, and that's sort of typical of what we see. And so when you see sort of this red surge overnight on election night, that's what's going to happen, that you're going to have a lot of unaffiliated and Democrat voters come in and vote absentee by mail and in person, and those are the ballots that come out on the first counts. And then as the night goes on and those Election Day ballots continue to come in, you'll see sort of this red surge of Republican votes come up. Then we asked, generally speaking, would you say things in the United States are headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track? 72.5% of people say that it's off on the wrong track. That's with a majority of saying it's definitely on the wrong track at 55.8%. 21.6% of people say it's headed in the right direction. That 72.5% is a daunting and a very large number. That's actually an uptick of what we've seen in the past. I believe it was 66% in September. In August, I think it was 64, 65% as well. So we're definitely seeing an uptick, and that's actually, that makes a big difference as you're heading into October, particularly a big difference if you're a Democrat trying to support President Biden's agenda. And so people are generally very pessimistic about the country. Then we do these generic ballot tests. I explain this every month, but it's important that people understand what it is. This is a statewide poll in North Carolina, and so we don't poll these individual congressional or state legislative districts, but we do ask people, generally speaking, when you're going to vote for state legislature or if you're going to vote for Congress, would you vote for a Republican or a Democrat? And so those are called generic ballot tests. We don't have third-party candidates like Libertarians or Green Party on this question because there aren't Libertarian or Green Party or Constitution Party candidates in all of those races. But generally speaking, are you going to vote Republican or Democrat? Republicans have bounced back. They had a slight lead of 2% last time we asked this question. Now they're up above 6% on this question at 50.1% to 43.9% for Democrats. 6.0% are unsure. That's a pretty substantial swing. As a matter of fact, they've gone from 2% to a 6% leads. Independent voters, unaffiliated voters, now prefer Republicans by 4% after preferring Democrats by 6% in September. So that's a 10-point swing among unaffiliated voters. And that is substantial in nature. This isn't the highest that we've ever seen Republicans score on a generic ballot test, but it is among the highest. I think the highest we've ever seen is 52%. And of course, this is approaching that. We also do a generic ballot test for Congress, and this is very, very similar in nature. Regardless of how you would vote at the state level, if the general election for U.S. Congress were held today, would you vote for the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate? 50.3% for the Republican candidate, 44.2% for the Democratic candidate. Again, this is a very healthy lead of about 6.1% for Republicans here. That lead has increased from 3% for Republicans in September to 6%, which is outside of the margin of error. All right, this is the question that probably most of you actually care about, and most of the reason why you would log in and watch this video is you want to know what's going to happen in the U.S. Senate race. And so we asked if the general election for U.S. Senate was held today, and you had to make a choice, who would you vote for? 46.9% said they would vote for Ted Budd. Democrat Sherry Beasley got 43.1%. Shannon Bray, the Libertarian candidate, got 2.3%. Matthew Hoh, the Green Party candidate, got 0.4%, and there are still 7.3% of people undecided. Let's talk about this race just for a minute. For the past two polls, in August and September, this race was tied. They were tied dead even at 42.4% apiece in August. I believe Sherry Beasley had a 0.7 or 0.6 lead in our September poll. And then over the past 2 or 3 weeks, as other polls have come out, including ours, you're seeing Ted Budd regain the lead here, more similar to the lead that he had as we polled this race back in May and June. And so this tracks very similar to the Trafalgar poll that came out late last week that had Budd up 4 points. I think there was an East Carolina University poll that came out last week as well that had Budd up 6 points. And so this is tracking with the trend that we are seeing pretty regularly, that Republicans are on the rise. Now, make note, and I've made note of this several times, you see Ted Budd is at 46.9% in this race. He is still tracking behind the generic congressional Republican candidate by about 4 to 5 points. That's been fairly typical. But right now, that is enough to still give him a 4-point lead in this race, which is just right at the margin of error. But again, the trend that we're seeing is that he is ticking up to about a 4-point lead. And I think East Carolina had him up to a 6-point lead in their poll. All right. And of course, you can see how this has gone over time. He started out with a lead back in May, grew that lead a little bit in June, and then that race became much tighter when we began polling in August and September, and Ted Budd has sprung out to a lead yet again. Again, and I want to say this, polls are not predictive in nature. One of the benefits of what we're able to do here with the Civitas poll is trend these same questions over time and see how people's attitudes have changed. But what this poll tells us is how people answer these questions October 20th through the 22nd. It does not tell us how they're going to vote on Election Day. It tells us how they would vote on Election Day if they were voting on that day, but they weren't really going to vote on that day. October 20th was the first day of early voting. So that being said, it is really close to the election, and there's plenty to feel good about in this poll if you're a Republican, but polls are not necessarily predictive. All right, we also have 2 Supreme Court races going on in North Carolina right now. A lot of people don't realize we vote for our state Supreme Court justices. We have 7 members of the North Carolina Supreme Court. 2 of those seats are up for election this year. Right now, Democrats enjoy a 4-3 majority on the state Supreme Court. Both of the seats that are up this year are currently held by Democrats. One of those is running for re-election, and one is an open seat. It is a very tenuous year for Democrats because if Republicans win just one of those seats, then Republicans have a partisan majority on the state Supreme Court through at least 2027, when Justice Paul Newby will have to resign due to an age restriction. But if Republicans win both of these seats, then Republicans will have a solid majority on the state Supreme Court through 2028, at which point we'll start seeing Republicans come back up for re-election. And so, again, this is a very important election for everybody, but it's a very precarious position for Democrats. The first seat that's open is the 2 candidates are Republican Richard Dietz and Democrat Lucy Inman. Both of these are justices on the state appellate court. Dietz is up by about 6 points right in this race, 48.8 to 42.4%. Similarly, we've got Democrat and Republican only in the other seat, with Democrat Sam Ervin, who is the incumbent in this seat, and Republican Trey Allen. Allen is up by 7.4% in this race, has continued to maintain a healthy lead, and actually a larger lead than Richard Dietz has, the Republican in the other race. And this is trending with what we're seeing on the generic ballot as well, that Republicans are just surging right now. And so this is not great news if you're a Democrat running for the state Supreme Court. All right. Then we ask people, do you approve or disapprove of the job that Joe Biden is doing as president? You can see that he has a 38.4% approval rating, a 55.3% disapproval rating, and 5.4% are neither, and less than 1% are unsure. Again, Joe Biden had a relatively even or even high approval rating coming into office in early 2021. But it was in August of 2021 with the Afghanistan withdrawal, if you want to go and look back at all of the polls that we've done since then, is when President Biden began to go underwater with his job approval rating, and he has not recovered from that since. And so we're seeing he is well underwater here by about 17 points or so. All right. Roy Cooper continues to be above water, and his approval rating as governor. Do you approve or disapprove of the job that Roy Cooper is doing as governor? And in that, he is just slightly above water, but within the margin of error, 46.4% to 43.5%. Cooper continues to sort of be counter to all of the other polling to other Democrats, particularly national Democrats, as they're polled in North Carolina. He continues to be more popular among even conservatives and Republicans than other Democrats are. If you come to any of our poll presentations or watch any poll presentations online, you know I've had very specific opinions about this and why that is, and that he's a very well-manicured candidate or a very well-manicured politician. But generally speaking, he's been able to keep his nose much cleaner than what we see with the approval ratings for President Biden. A lot more people are unsure or don't have an opinion about Roy Cooper than they do about Joe Biden. Of course, that's probably the byproduct of the 24-hour national news cycle. All right. There is a rumor going around the national political circles that Roy Cooper could be a candidate for vice president. Going into the 2024 election cycle. He will be termed out as governor here in North Carolina. And so we asked the question, what do people think about that? Would you support or oppose Roy Cooper if he was the vice presidential nominee in 2024? And while he was popular and had a good approval rating or above water approval rating, 40.8% support his VP nomination in 2024, while 44.8%, right at the margin of error, oppose this. Neither at 5.8%, 8.6% are unsure. We can speculate about why that's the case. Probably something about people's opinions about Democrats at the national level versus Democrats at the state level. But that is an interesting dichotomy where he's above water on his job approval rating, but people aren't quite so sure about that when we get down to making him, one heartbeat away from the Oval Office. All right. Then we asked this question, this is really interesting. Do you think Joe Biden should run for presidential re-election in 2024? 26% say yes. 64.6% of people say no, of likely voters say no. 9.5% are unsure. That is an absolutely remarkable number. 65% of people oppose him running for re-election. Democrats are actually pretty split on this. 41% support, 42% oppose. Unaffiliated voters in North Carolina, and against that's the largest voting bloc in North Carolina. 66% of unaffiliated voters say that he should not run for re-election in 2024. That does not bode well for his re-election opportunities if he does run again in North Carolina, but he didn't win North Carolina in 2020, so I'm not sure what sort of difference that makes. I think the next question is actually really telling if we're trying to figure out the opinion of Governor Cooper as well as how people are going to vote for the General Assembly. We asked, thinking about elections for the North Carolina state legislature, which statement comes closer to the way you think? The first statement is, since the governor is a Democrat, we need Republicans in charge of the state legislature to act as a check and balance on the governor and his agenda. The second statement is, since the governor is a Democrat, we need Democrats in charge of the legislature to help support the governor's agenda. 50.8% went with a Republican-controlled legislature, and 39.5% went with a Democrat-controlled legislature. That tracks not quite as closely with the generic ballot test, but you can see people are actually willing to be thoughtful about why they are voting for a Republican or why they are voting for a Democrat. It wasn't that long ago, actually just before we got into COVID, the Civitas polls showed that a lot of North Carolinians didn't even know what party Roy Cooper was with, but that has changed as we've polled that several times since the COVID-19 outbreak, and people know who Roy Cooper is, and they know what party he's with, and so it appears that a majority of people are willing to vote on a Republican legislature to check his agenda and actually slow the progress of government. This idea that voters overall want sort of this unstoppable government movement of one party dominating just doesn't tend to bear out in polling. This works in national polls as well on Congress, is that voters want things to be slow. I think that overall political parties and political consultants tend to underestimate how intelligent voters are. Voters are much more thoughtful than people give them credit for, and this question bears that out. That 51% prefer a check and balance on the governor. And independents actually prefer a divided government here as well. 49%, a plurality of unaffiliated voters, want divided state government. All right. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Inflation is a primary issue influencing my vote in this year's election. 64.7% agree, 24.2% disagree, 9.5% say neither, 1.6% say unsure. Unsurprisingly, there's a partisan bent to this question. 65% of voters agree that inflation is a primary issue. That includes 88% of Republicans and 65% of unaffiliated voters. Democrats, interestingly, are split with 43% in agreement and 40% disagreeing. I asked this question to sort of tease out what is the top, we asked a few different ways, what is the top issue driving voters this fall, or influencing voters as they go in to vote this fall. And so the next question is, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Abortion is a primary issue influencing my vote in this year's elections. 57.8% or 57.6%, I'm sorry, agree, 28.8% disagree. And again, that 57.6%, that is a strong majority, not quite as high as 64.7% on the issue of inflation. But again, there's a partisan bent to this, with 58% of voters saying that they agree that this is a primary issue. Of course, that can break different ways. The word abortion and that it's a primary issue driving breaks different ways. Probably not so much the case when we say the word inflation, but 77% of Democrats and 54% of independents agree with this. Remember, that's 77% of Democrats on abortion, but only 43% of Democrats said that inflation was a primary issue driving their vote this fall. Republicans are split, again, much in the same way Democrats were on this. 40% in agreement on abortion, 45% disagreeing that it's a primary issue as they're considering their vote in this year's elections. All right. Then we asked them, which of the following is the most important issue for you? We gave them these options. This wasn't a fill in the blank on your own, but you can see the economy far and away runs away with this with 30.8%. We actually separated inflation out, although they are interrelated issues, the economy and inflation. But the order goes, the economy at 30.8%, abortion at 18.3%, 14.9% inflation, and then 8.6% healthcare, 6.4% the environment. And from there, you're getting down, below 6%. Foreign policy doesn't even reach the margin of error, neither does energy. But interestingly enough, you combine the economy and inflation, and you're getting up above 45%. You're approaching majorities at that point, and it's clearly at the uppermost of everybody's mind as they're going to vote this fall. People are definitely concerned about inflation in the environment. I think this is where we're seeing some of Democratic messaging sort of going tone deaf. We saw Nancy Pelosi give a quote at a press gaggle yesterday in Washington, D.C., where she said that Democrats have to change the issue away from inflation. She said something along the lines of, you can check this out, it's in the Hill, we don't have an inflation problem, the problem is cost of living. To rephrase that, that's sort of like saying, doctor, the problem isn't that the patient is bleeding to death, it's that she's losing too much blood. She's saying the same thing, but just saying it in a different way. She's trying to rebrand in front of a lot of really smart reporters who know the difference, and voters who know the difference, quite honestly. But inflation and the economy and inflation, they're interrelated, and you can see that voters care about that. Then we asked, how would you describe the current state of the American economy? Now remember, 30.8% are concerned about the economy right now. Another, basically 15% say that inflation is their top issue. 53.6% of people say that the economy is poor right now. 34% say that it's fair. Only 11.1% say that it's good. 1.3%, which is within the margin of error, well within the margin of error, say that it's great. I would say that people are fairly bearish. Voters are very bearish on the American economy right now. It's unfortunate, but I can sympathize with that right now. A majority of Democrats actually say that the economy is fair, but still a quarter of Democrats, around 25%, say that the economy is poor. All right. Now, related to inflation, inflation has to do with the prices of goods and services. We wanted to know what people thought about food prices. If you've been keeping up with the Consumer Price Index, and we report on the Consumer Price Index a lot, as well as write about agriculture issues here at the John Locke Foundation, we wanted to know, have people noticed it? What are they feeling about food prices? Food prices are driving a lot of the increase in inflation, generally speaking, across the Consumer Price Index. So what do people think about that, and how are they perceiving it? We asked, how concerned are you about the current prices of food? I'm actually staggered by this number. It's a massive number, with 88.5% saying that they are concerned. That's 60.8%, a clear majority saying that they're very concerned about the price of food. 10.3% say they're not concerned. 1.2% say that they are unsure. I have lost it in my notes here. Nope, that's the next question, I'm sorry. But if we move along to the next question, compared to a year ago, do you believe that the price of food has gotten more expensive, less expensive, or stayed about the same? 94.2% of people say that it has gotten more expensive. That's with 70.6% of people saying that it has gotten much more expensive. 2.4% say less expensive. I don't know who they are, but that's within the margin of error. 2.8% stayed about the same. 0.8% are unsure. If you look at that, you can see that women are actually outpacing men on the much more expensive on that. Republicans are also outpacing independents and Democrats on how much more expensive food is. No real surprise on that. Republicans are really honing in on inflation. All of their messaging is about inflation and the Biden economy and sort of things like that. But it is clear that this is an issue that no one has ignored, and it is being felt across all demographic areas. Then we said, a year from today, do you believe the amount you will spend on groceries will be higher, lower, or stay about the same? 66.2%, That's 2/3 of likely voters in North Carolina say that it will be higher. 8.4% say lower. 18.9% say about the same. Now, remember that 18.9% who say it's about the same, that's still not good news when you have 94% of people saying that it's more expensive than it was. They're saying it will stay here and still be expensive. 2/3 of people are saying it will be even higher than it is now, which is actually just worse news. That's not, less bad news. And this is just largely true across all demographics. I don't actually have a lot of commentary on this because it's just very clear that it's affecting everyone. Our final question is, has the cost of groceries in 2022 caused you to change your spending habits a lot, a little, or not at all? That's 47.3%, nearly a majority, but not quite, say a lot. 36.6% say a little. 15.5% say none at all. 0.5% say unsure. That's just a remarkable figure when half of people are having to change their spending habits, how they're feeding their family, the type of goods or services that they're buying at the grocery store. It's just an absolutely remarkable figure. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a live audience. I don't have a guest commentator. Like I said, this was an abbreviated poll presentation, but I do have Brooke Medina, our communications vice president here at the John Locke Foundation. Did you text these to me? This is the sophisticated communications we have at Locke. Has texted me some questions that we had online. Question from Rhonda. Do you think that voters will be so weary of the economy by 2024 that social issues drive the presidential election cycle? It is possible, but I hope that is not the case. It is a rough place to stay in this sort of economy for 2 years when you've got, if I can find it, the economy is the top issue here. 53.6% of people say that the economy is poor. It is entirely possible that's the case. I think that's definitely the case this year, although this is not a presidential election cycle and it's a midterm cycle. I think that Democrats and the left have definitely tried to make abortion the issue on this election, which that works in some states that had trigger laws after the Dobbs decision, but in a state like North Carolina where the Dobbs decision came and nothing happened, which is by and large most states across the 50 states. People felt they were oversold. Democrats cried wolf on what had happened. And even now, you have Joe Biden coming out and saying, if you come out and vote and Democrats keep the majority, then we'll do something on abortion. And you're seeing a lot of focus groups and a lot of polling finding that women, of course that's supposed to be a women's issue, right, are finding that disingenuous. Democrats have majorities in both chambers of Congress right now. They have the White House. There's no reason they couldn't pass the law right now instituting abortion as a federal right, and they just haven't done it. And so now he's dangling it as a carrot, but they're really just using it as a wedge issue to gain political power, not to actually do something. Like if they actually cared about the issue, they'd pass a law, and they haven't done that because they were waiting on 9 people in black robes to maintain it in that way. A question from Troy. If Republicans win a supermajority at the state level, what do you think will be their first veto override? Oh, that's a fun question. I don't know, really. That's a really great question. A few months ago, I probably would have said something related to the Emergency Management Act and the emergency powers of the government. But remember, the state budget that passed actually reformed some of the emergency powers of the governor. And so I don't actually know what they would go after first. I think a lot of people, if these numbers bear out what we saw with the generic ballot tests and people's feelings about needing to provide a check and balance on the governor, I have said before, I think that Republicans will get a supermajority in the Senate, but not quite reach it in the House. But if these numbers are true in the poll and they continue to be true through Election Day, I would not be surprised if there are supermajorities in both chambers of the General Assembly. And at that point, that does change what Republicans can do with their legislative agenda. I'm just not 100% sure what the first thing would be that they would do. Do we have any other questions, Brooke? All right. We don't have any other questions right now. That's perfectly okay. Always feel free to email us with questions about our polling. You can, again, look at our polls at johnlocke.org. Click on the polls tab and look around. But thank you for joining me online for the abbreviated version of our poll presentation. If you'd like to come for a more comprehensive conversation tonight at the Jesse Helms Center down in Wingate, North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte, You can come down. Brian Rogers, who's president of the Jesse Helms Center, will join me as the guest commentator down there. And we'll also be watching a few campaign videos as it is this year, the 50th anniversary of Senator Helms' first election to the U.S. Senate. Anyway, thank you for joining me again. We'll actually do a poll next month, a November poll, as we've been doing typically for the past several years, because once we get past the election, we need to figure out what in the world happened to us. And so stay up on election night, join us online at Carolina Journal's Facebook page for the live stream, and then join us again next month for the November presentation of the Civitas poll. Thank you very much.